Okay, doke. Let's go ahead and kick it off. So I'm going to do a quick intro. Thank you guys so much for joining today. And kind of rules of the day. If you have any questions that you want to ask that haven't already been submitted when you registered, feel free to just add them into chat. We'll make sure we ask for it. But it's my great pleasure to introduce our guest today, Bernd Leger, who's the current CMO of Cornerstone OnDemand, a leading learning and talent management platform designed to unite people, teams, technology, and business. Previously, Bernd was the CMO of Mimecast, Nextthink, Checkmarks, CloudLock, and has spent more than 2 decades building and leading marketing teams across numerous industries at companies like Localytics, Rapid7, Veracode, and more. So welcome, Bernd. Excited to have you and hear some of your wisdom about how we're evolving the marketing space.
Thanks, Elaine. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
This meeting is being recorded.
Well, maybe we'll kick it off, and we'd love to have you talk a little bit about how you've seen the MarTech space evolve over your multiple decades career.
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks for asking. I think it's fascinating. Like you said, I've been in this industry for about 2 decades, and just seeing the evolution of technology in our space. And I think we've become so much more accountable. There's so much more in regards to being able to measure marketing and the effectiveness of marketing. I think we have a much stronger impact on not just top of the funnel, but really looking at the entire value chain. And I think even the role of marketing in that sense has changed. We're leaning in a lot more into customer marketing, customer advocacy, looking at not just looking at the entire funnel and being involved there. Like, for example, I run the BDR team as well at Cornerstone, so it's a much broader mandate than maybe the typical marketing function that CMOs have had 5 years ago. So it is fascinating in regards to what we're able to do. And I think looking at I think there's these architecture maps and how many solutions are out there. Like, if you're in MarTech, what an incredible opportunity to sell to marketing folks, but also it's so competitive. There's so many tools out there. There's so many solutions out there, and just making sense of it all and looking at what has the most impact is always challenging. I would say, like, in many ways, we have sometimes too much technology, right? So how do you focus on that technology that's going to impact your business the most? And I also always look at who's going to be the business owner for these solutions, and who's going to make sure that somebody is looking at the success of these solutions. So those are like maybe some top level observations that we have.
One of the things that I started noticing probably about 2 years ago, it felt like we had a full decade where it was the unbundling of SaaS, and especially on the go-to-market side, market leaders, sales leaders, CS leaders bought a dozen tools, and then all of a sudden you had the problem of, to your point, having a business owner dealing with it. And it feels like now teams are really trying to do more with less. Yeah. How have you kind of seen that? Is that a trend that you've also noticed?
100%. I think it has kind of come back to, in some cases, I think I've had a stack of like 30 different tools. And then as we unbundle that and as we question, like, okay, well, how's that being used? And there's always this panacea of like unlimited potential with each of these tools and solutions. And we kind of all go through this trough of disillusionment, and as we deploy. So it does come back to me for like, but how do we tie this to the ultimate goal of the organization? At the end of the day, it's always about revenue. So how do we tie it to those goals? And then who's going to look after this day to day? Like, I've seen this, I'll give you a simple example, like chat. I've seen this numerous times where this massive idea of like chat's going to revolutionize how we engage with customers and prospects. And then it's just kind of often a letdown in regards to who's writing the plays and who's writing the different avenues of how a customer can engage. So for me, it always comes back to thinking through that prospect journey, thinking through that customer journey, and then mapping that out and thinking through, well, what are the technologies and tools that will help us to optimize and create a better experience for prospects and customers. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Have you seen any other kind of technological wave or new technology come to the marketing stack that you felt like was truly game changing?
Yeah, I mean, this isn't new. I do think when we think about ABX and thinking through like predictive analytics and being able to just have much tighter alignment around your go-to-market strategy and having that clearly defined strategy of looking through your ICP, your ideal customer profile, and who you're really going after, and then looking for technologies that can help you with that. So I do think, obviously key topic here is artificial intelligence and looking at how is AI changing and revolutionizing the industry. And I do think there's so much potential there. So I think that's probably a game changer for all of us. So maybe it was ABX 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but I still feel like that's very relevant for particularly if you're targeting enterprise accounts. And there's a lot of like really cool tools here and there that I think have potential as well. But for me, like the predictive capabilities still has major potential. Like if you're able to leverage data and intelligence, that for me still is kind of the holy grail in some ways.
Yeah, I feel like the entire concept of intent data, to your point, kind of more an account-based approach has really gotten people to be much more data-driven and metrics-driven. One of
Yeah.
the things I keep hearing though from a lot of other CMOs is while everyone wants to do true ABM or ABX, it ends up being one to many or at the best one to few. Have you seen people truly be able to do it at a scale where it's one to one or consistently one to few?
Yeah, I think it's hard. It's hard because to your point, part of it is the scale. How do you really truly make that happen? How do you create that scale when like we all have limited resources, we have limited teams. So how do you customize, how do you personalize that approach to make it relevant for each individual company so that they feel like it's truly for them and you're paying attention to their unique needs and you're personalizing. So I still feel like that's challenging if you're just throwing people at this. It is a combination of people and technology and process to make that work better. So I'm not sure I have the silver bullet here, but I think kind of looking at the combination of those three aspects will hopefully show us the right path in doing that. I think maybe one more thing to add here, Elaine, is like I think often overlooked is even looking at our own solutions that we offer to the market, and things like product-led growth still for me is also a major game changer, particularly when you're looking at top of the funnel, when you're looking at how do we bring people into an organization. Just so much better than like click for a demo here. Like if you can bring people into your product and then looking at your product to give you those signals and that intent data that you talked about, I think can be extremely powerful. And I've spent a lot of time in my past two companies really thinking through how do we make that work, and then aligning the entire organization from engineering to product management to marketing to product marketing on designing that experience to make it phenomenal. I think that has a lot of potential as well.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It feels like to properly execute a PLG motion, it really is a whole team sport, as opposed to when you look at more traditional enterprise, it's very sales driven and everyone's in service of that, including the marketing team.
Yeah, yeah.
One thing you mentioned earlier is that you also lead the BDR team at Cornerstone OnDemand. Curious, two questions here. First question, do you think that BDR, SDR should always sit under marketing or sales? I know it's controversial.
Right. I don't think there's a right or wrong here. I think it can sit in either team. I have a lot of passion for the BDR team. I've run inside sales. I've run the BDR teams for a long time. I feel like in some ways having that marketing has a lot of benefits to it. I think one, because you kind of become the steward of the pipeline more holistically, and then you can kind of control a little bit the inbound and the outbound motions. I think sometimes when it sits under sales, it has often more of a short-term focus. And I think the sales team will always be looking out for like the immediate payback and payoff. And I just feel like the marketing teams also will have a little bit more focus and rigor around the processes to make it work. And so everything from what are the cadences and how many touch points do we want to have? Do we have that optimized? How do we think through the combination of inbound and outbound? How do we think through compensation, career pathing? So for those reasons, I feel like I like to have them in my team. And I think as long as we can articulate the value to the sales teams, and that really doesn't change much. Like I've always said, like to my sales partners, is like, hey, you get all the benefits without the headache and without the overhead. And I think that's kind of gone over well. And I always then treat the BDR teams really as that intermediary. So I want them to have half of their foot in the marketing team and half of their foot in the sales team. And I'm not trying to break up their relationship they have with their sales counterparts. Quite the contrary, I'm trying to build that out. But I also want to make sure that link to the marketing organization is much stronger. So everything from joint planning as we think about putting campaigns in market and just giving them a heads up and involving them early in messaging. And I think there's so much more opportunity for marketing to engage more strongly if we have a little bit more control over that. So yeah, I like having them in the marketing team.
That's always been my take too. It feels like the baton handoff happens at opportunity creation, and everything before that is kind of one team, and everything after that is a separate team, so to speak. And that by nature means that the SDRs, BDRs should be, at least grouped together with marketing. When you think about AI though, and how this kind of comes into play, especially for BDRs,
right?
What does the future of that look like?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly exciting. I mean, we talk about co-piloting and just like, I think it's making the lives of a BDR so much easier when I think about company research, prioritizing, thinking about optimizing their call scripts, optimizing their email outreaches. There's so much potential in making their lives easier. But I think particularly when you think about most BDRs, if they're not career BDRs, most of them will be earlier on in their career. They're still trying to find their footing. So just like whatever help we can provide them from go research these companies. And here's an easy way to do that. Like even starting there is such a beneficial advantage that they can tap into. So I think that world is ripe for disruption. I know there's some people who go as far as, well, maybe we don't need BDRs anymore. Maybe this will all be driven through automation and AI or generative AI, where that kind of goes away. I'm not quite there yet. I think there's still a value in having these face-to-face conversations and building relationships. But I do think for the short term, tremendous benefit in tapping into AI for just creating efficiencies within the BDR teams, for sure.
I guess going back to the do more with less, do you think the team shrinks, meaning you need less BDRs to do the same amount of work or more work?
Well, it's either that or like thinking through, how does the role of BDR change? Can you you just talked about the handoff point and handing over the baton. Like in many ways, I feel like there's so much more opportunity in the current environment, in the current market environment, to think about BDRs also for your cross-sell and upsell motion. So can we reallocate BDRs that we've leveraged for net new to have them have a stronger play for cross-sell and upsell? So again, AI can help even identifying opportunities, like what products are ideal add-ons for products that our customers have already bought. Like where do we see the BDRs complementing existing account management teams? And particularly like in some cases, it might be you have only so much coverage with your account managers and you don't have good coverage at the bottom of the market. So how does AI and how do BDRs help in providing broader coverage with your existing customers? So I think that's another opportunity to kind of reimagine the role of BDRs and putting them to use in a broader way that maybe we haven't traditionally used them for.
I like that idea of kind of thinking through where are the humans best start, like where do you really need humans and can we reallocate them? It's not here's your role and you have to stay within this box.
Yeah.
I think that's a smart approach.
Absolutely.
What areas of the kind of marketing and sales, call it process in general, do you think is going to be most disrupted in the short term and then the long term by AI technologies?
Yeah, I mean, number one for me is probably content. I think that's the most ripe for disruption. Just when I think about acceleration of content creation with AI is, I mean, that's just like, we should be able to do things so much more targeted, so much more with efficiency, with more velocity than we have been historically. So for me, that's probably a big area of disruption just on AI related. But I think overall, like that whole value chain, for me, kind of comes back to intent and intelligence and just being able to tap into where do we spend our time? Like, how do we think about, like, one of my sales leaders, we had a QBR and he said, like, the hardest part for me is knowing where to spend my time with my team. And so like if we can make it easier for the sales teams to be focused on the right information, on the right accounts, in the right areas, that makes them more efficient. And I think looking at technology as a major facilitator in that prioritization for me is probably one of the biggest upsides and opportunities.
So almost like a kind of next generation of intent data. So can we really put the right information in the hands of the right people at the right time?
Yeah, I think that's one. I think also when I think about in my past few companies where I've always seen a struggle is like that alignment with the sales teams. Like it's like, okay, when we think about enterprise motions, we think about ABS and we think about account selections. Sometimes it's like the salespeople will put forward their proposals, their accounts, and then it's like, okay, well, we want to go after Fortune 500. And let me tell you, I'm sure every other company is probably approaching it in a very similar fashion. So everybody's going after the same accounts. It's not the most scientific and it's not the most methodical. So one is just pure intent, but even thinking through like ideal customer profile and how do we think about the market and allocation of where do we put our salespeople in which markets, in which sectors, in which industries? How do we align our campaign motions with that? Just that whole area and really getting crisp on making sure we're on the same page. I think there's so much opportunity there for optimization. So for me, that's probably one of the key things I've seen over and over that just isn't quite right, that doesn't quite fit. And then you have debates on well, why don't we spend more time here? Why can't you help me over there? Like, if we just have more alignment from the beginning, then there shouldn't be a debate. It's just objective, and we just kind of, okay, well, this is what we said we were going to do, and then here's the accounts, and here's where we see intent. So we're going to supplement your predefined accounts with the ones where we're seeing intent, and then we go off of that. If it's more of a, if it's not an enterprise, obviously it's a little different. If it's more like transactional, then the plays are a little bit different. But I think that would be an area that I feel like we still have some room for opportunities for optimization.
We actually talk about this a lot at Tofu. We kind of call it white space identification. So oftentimes it's how do you find the industries, the accounts, the personas that you actually should be going after, as opposed to doing it, to your point, by here's your territory, go find the largest companies you can attack. Or we think we want to target these two industries. And so can we actually use a data-driven approach to do that? And then also help people figure out, okay, now if you're targeting this industry and this account, what should you be saying? What should you be creating? All of that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you.
When you think about personalization in general and kind of the evolution of that, how are you thinking about incorporating personalization both in terms of your own product and then also on your go-to-market efforts?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think for us, you kind of gave a brief explanation of what we do. So we're in the learning and management space. So for us, it's all about how do we, there's three ways to think about learning and management. So one is like, it's about you, like for example, what courses do we think are the right courses for you to take so that you have the proficiency that you need to be effective in the organization. And then it's about the me, which is like the employee, like what does the employee care about and what kind of courses does he or she want to take? And then it's about the we, which is like how do we bring that magic together in regards to skilling and looking at opportunities within the organization and within the employees. And so for us, that's kind of where that magic, the AI happens. It's this matching up of like the interest of the employee with the interest of the employer. So I think that kind of has some opportunity for like leveraging our own product from an AI perspective. How do we get smarter around understanding with your current skill set, what are your career opportunities? Where can you go? How can you develop? How do we match that up with potentially open jobs within the organization? And that's going to be extremely powerful for organization to optimize that. And we have customers who have 60,000 employees, and their mantra is like, we want to fill every position possible with somebody in the organization, but they don't have the skills and the knowledge to make that match happen, and they don't know where to find those people within the organization. And just like having job postings doesn't make that easier. So when you can bring AI into that mix, so that's how we think about our own solution, our own products. Like, can we facilitate this matching to happen in a way where it's very beneficial for both the employee and the company? I don't know if that answers your question on how we think about it from a product perspective.
And then I guess from your team perspective, is this something you're trying to imbue within your team when they think about their go-to-market efforts?
Absolutely. I mean, I think for me, like I'm from a like we're constantly challenging our own teams to think through, well, what's that next wave, that next evolution? How do we think about incorporating AI more just in our entire go-to-market motions, and how do we think about that? I'm constantly challenging the team. Like we actually, our head of learning and learning is like, he asked us like, what should be the skill of the quarter or the skill of the year for us? And it is AI. Like that is the skill we want everybody in the team really to embrace and to think through, like, how can that help me in my job and my day-to-day? For sure.
I think for a lot of people, it feels both exciting, a little bit scary, amorphous, and nobody really knows what they should be doing, what they should be learning, what tools they should be trying. How do you approach that? And I guess how do you tell some people on your team what ways they can either educate themselves or start trying and playing with different tools?
I think there's so many good vehicles out there, and including your session here. It's just like, how do we provide information? How do we educate? And I think it starts with research and just getting a better grasp on comparing, like, what are people actually doing? What are some actual use cases? My recommendation always is not to be afraid, not to look at this as like something that you want to have a hands-off approach, because ultimately this will change our world. And it certainly has the potential to do extremely positive things. And of course, it can be scary because the first thought might be, hey, does this have any impact on my job? Does this have any impact on, you asked the question, does it create efficiencies? Do we need as many people? And so I do think, there's some scary questions that come with it. But at the end of the day, like for those of us who embrace it, I think the rewards should justify the investment in the research that we're doing. And I do think ultimately this will be a competitive differentiator for organizations who are smart about finding out the use cases where it makes sense in the organizations, and then looking at how to apply it in a way where it's ethical. We're making sure that we're not violating any copyright information. And I do think there are some hard questions around those as well that we have to address. But if we're kind of engaging a broader conversation, and we're engaging our teams, and we're asking them to do more research, and there's so much information out there on what people are doing, what some use cases are. So just starting with the research and then applying it in our own environments, in our own companies, to think through, well, does that apply here? Is that something we could try? Or where do we think we're going to get the biggest benefits? I think that's the approach, and inviting the teams in and asking them for their input and for their research. In many cases, millennials and people in their 20s who are entering their workforce, they're going to be so much more open for this change and for like leveraging the new technology. So I would say in many cases, they're going to be the ones disrupting. They're going to be the ones who are going to be pushing and driving this change, rather than maybe the management layer that we have today.
I was listening to a podcast last week, and I thought they framed this really well. They were talking about winners and losers when it came to AI. And one of their framings was that the people who win actually are the more junior, new entrants into the workforce. And the people who lose are middle management, because the newer workers, A, they're cheaper, so you're much more willing to hire them and keep them. But now if they have the efficiency of 4 or 5 people, they're going to be, where these tools, and that's how they like to do things. It's slower to adopt some of these technologies. They're the ones that are actually going to lose out. And I thought that was actually an interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. This is the innovation that's going to come from within the organization, from most probably from your junior ranks, right? They're going to be pushing this. So I agree with that.
One of the other things I like with kind of marketing and sales and CS is when I think about one of the other things when it comes to experimentation is, what is the cost of failure? And the cost of testing and failing, it's something in marketing pretty low. It's not healthcare, it's not legal, it's not something where somebody's going to die or people are going to lose millions of dollars. It feels like the ability to kind of pick up and test a lot of these tools, and to your point before around PLG being a really widely adopted motion now, where you can actually just start trying it, there is very low cost of failure. And so to me, that's kind of what I encourage people to do, is like, just try a bunch of stuff. You don't even have to deploy it. You can just, play and see if, does this actually fit your need?
I agree. I think particularly we're still in early days, right? So I think a lot of technologies are still emerging and developing and evolving. So I think this is kind of the fast fail, or the fast succeed in some ways. Like this is the time where you should be experimenting and trying out new things, and like maybe getting a little bit like lowering your bar around what's the traditional threshold for bringing in new technology. I think in this case, it is something where we should have a lower threshold, and we should be looking at disruptive ways of doing things differently. So I'm in agreement there. Like I always encourage my team, like I always say, like, look, we can always make mistakes, and we can always fail. Let's just not fail 3 times with the same challenge. And to your point, I think that is kind of the marketing world, right? It is experimental. It's not just a science. It is part of experimentation. And because we have such good data, we can see what works and what doesn't pretty quickly, and then we can adjust.
Based on that, I guess, from your current research, where do you feel like AI is kind of ready to actually be deployed? And then where do you feel like it's falling down and there's still massive gaps?
Yeah, and we're still early days ourselves, so I can't say I have the silver bullet here. I would, like I said earlier, I think for me, content creation, definitely a big opportunity. It's even little things like finding the right resources in your team, like job descriptions, things like that. I've seen huge success in like just getting more creative around how we're attracting talent in our teams and bringing the right people in. But for me, like, the whole digital engine is just so much ripe for AI disruption. I think about personalization. I think about ad copy. I think about SEO in general, pay-per-click, just keyword research. Like all those areas are just so ripe for opportunities there. Your question around what maybe not isn't quite ready yet, that's a hard one. Like I feel like there's opportunity everywhere. So I don't know. Like I haven't really thought about like where I would use it, but I'm more thinking through like what are the immediate ones that I want to experiment with, I want to try out.
I can tell you some places I've seen it kind of fall down. Imagery and video does not feel like it's there yet.
That's a great point. Yeah, that's a good point.
You can see, especially when it comes to marketing, like you can see the kernel of like, oh, it's going to be there. But I feel like we're not quite there yet. And then I guess similar things of when you still have hallucinations and when you still have inaccurate information, having that level of direct trust in the system can sometimes be tricky, especially if you're using it for more like account-based information. So
that's a really good point. Is like being able to trust the accuracy of the information. I still think there needs to be a level of like, you can't just trust, right? There needs to be like, for me, like in many cases, it's a great starting point that you then need to like investigate further or use it, or kind of use it again as a starting point. I love your example of the imagery. Like I've seen, when you start playing around with it and you're like, hey, go try this and let's see what comes out. I think that's also, there's so many potential hazards with imagery just because, when you look at where the information is being pulled, where the images are being pulled, like you just don't know like whose copyright you're violating. I think that is an area where I would be very cautious for sure, right? And anything, any area where you need actual code, I would be cautious. So when you think about website development like that, so I would stay away from code snippets and anything where you're not sure, like, and anything where, and this is a debate we're having actively internally, like anything where you have concerns around your own intellectual property, you do not want to be feeding any of your proprietary information into the AI engines. That just kind of crosses a threshold that we're not comfortable with, right? We're like, hey, we can't have that. We don't want to feed like all of our, I don't know, like let's say our customer database into an AI engine. Like that just kind of goes maybe too far in some cases. So I think you just have to be careful of what's okay, what's easy to do, and where are you getting into kind of dicey water in regards to your own IP.
how are you guys thinking about that? Have you created any policies or any things around that? I know it used to be a public company and then it was taken private a few years ago. And I'm just seeing larger enterprises are being pretty cautious around this.
Absolutely. I think we've got really good guidance from our general counsel. So we do have a general policy that is being rolled out that just talks to, and in our case, it's almost like, what are the AI tools that are formally approved that we can use, and then like that's kind of the guiding principle, right? So like here's what you can use, and then anything else you'd have to make a business case for, or by exception only. So I do think we're trying to like control like that usage a little bit, and there's clear policies that come with, okay, here are the tools you can use, here are the use cases you can use them for. So, and then I think it's just from there we kind of go into an active conversation. If we have specific use cases or we have specific tools that we want, we have to then actually approach it from, okay, let's go through an approval process. What does it look like? But it is certainly not the Wild West for sure. We are putting a lot of guardrails on, I think for good reason. Like you do have to have some sort of framing that helps your entire employee base understand like what can be done and what they shouldn't be doing. So I think that's helpful. It's kind of like when you go back to the early days of social media policies and like, what people should be talking about and what they shouldn't. And I think as long as you have those guardrails, I think it makes it much easier to understand like what can be done and what shouldn't be done.
Are there certain criteria that they're using to decide whether something is approved or not?
Well, like I said earlier, I think it comes back to where do we feel like, do we have an understanding of where the AI technology comes from, what's being used, how is it, where does it feed into? Are these established solutions? Are they, like I mentioned earlier, do they have any impact on our own IP? Like those are some of the criteria that I think are kind of coming into play here.
Got it. When you think about kind of the evolution of your team, it's been interesting to also watch how specialized marketers have gotten. Probably more specialization across the marketing org than almost any other team. Do you think that goes away with AI? Do you think that becomes more important with AI? I guess, how are you thinking about your team construction over time?
That's a good question. I don't know if I really thought that one through yet. Kind of thinking through on the fly here how that would impact my team. I think in some ways, if I would start a marketing career, I would be thinking very carefully, to your point earlier, like how would I want to design my career in a way where I can leverage AI as a positive, and where would I be concerned about going in a certain path which might be ripe for more disruption? So I think that's maybe something I would think about. In some ways, from a configuration perspective, I don't think you want to over specialize too much because I do think the technology allows you to be more of a generalist in some ways, because it gives you access to technology and to framing that maybe you don't need as much as a specialist anymore. Like you don't have to be so super specialized because you have access to more technology. So I do think in that sense, it provides you more opportunities for providing, going to different directions and kind of being a little bit more of a generalist, and if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how this evolves. I think my current take, which I'm very open to having my mind changed, is that so much of the specialized work will go away. So much of the content, which is very manual today, so much of the manual design. SEO could get flipped on its head completely.
Right.
A lot of the things around, you might have like an email marketing specialist where if a lot of this stuff is now automated,
Right.
you don't need somebody full time on that role. So I am paying a lot of attention to see how that's evolving, just because I do feel like it's something where we're not going to need that level of individuals own one channel and that's all they own.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like even the example of SEO and pay-per-click and specialization there, like what does it mean for like the ecosystem? And when you think about your suppliers and when you think about like where are you going to go outside, like what can you bring house, like where do you go for specialization and specific knowledge outside? Like I think those are also interesting questions. Like in some ways you can go to more specialized places, in some ways you might not need third parties as much anymore. Like I don't know, like even localization, or when you think about translation, like just like the acceleration of pace and being able to like turn something around more quickly, I think will just kind of force the ecosystem and your supply chain to kind of reimagine themselves as well, to think differently.
My take on this is the first thing that gets disrupted is actually agencies.
Right.
It's, to your point, using an agency for SEO, PPC, design, content localization, you replace it with a tool. And
Yeah.
that tool can do, in 1/8 the cost, 10 times the work. And
Yeah.
then the cool thing about that too is now you can really leverage your internal team so much more and
Yeah.
really focus them on, in my words, like the creative and the strategic. And can you align those people just doing that and then let a tool offboard all the manual stuff?
Yeah, I agree.
What have you guys experimented with, either you or people on your team?
Yeah, like I said, we're still really early days, so I've kind of thrown out the hook for like, hey, let's kind of see what's out there. And I've asked the teams to come back and actually present back to us as well, like what are they seeing, or like what are some interesting technologies. And I would say it's still really early days. So I do think we're thinking about like content, we're thinking about the whole digital side, SEO, pay-per-click, we're thinking about localization. Those are kind of the key areas that we're playing around with right now that are, I would say, like early indicators for where we want to go. And then I think from there we just kind of see what else is possible.
Absolutely. Have you seen any other companies or peers of yours who've either adopted tools that have been kind of impactful or just done tests that you think are interesting?
Yeah, I talked to I was at a CMO roundtable the other night, and we were just talking. And it's funny, like AI is almost like it is you almost kind of you're like, wow, like another AI session, because we talked so much about it. And coming back to the BDR model, where she said there's like she had like this demo where I was like it was basically a virtual BDR. It was like it wasn't a person anymore. And just like, wow, I mean that's interesting, right? Just like when you think about where it can go and what's possible. So. And I hadn't really thought about it going that far. So I do hear a lot of other people who are like trying different things, going in different directions. That one for me was, wow, okay, I hadn't really thought about that. So I'm always curious what others are doing. I'd love to hear your thoughts as well as you're engaging with your audience and with other speakers on. I'd be curious to hear from your perspective what you're hearing from others as well.
It's been interesting because I actually I like to study kind of more historical times to see. I'm a big believer that informs where we are today and kind of what will play out in the future. And I was looking back at the history of RPA, or robotic process automation, and there's a lot of things that I'm seeing right now in AI that really mimic the adoption in the early days of RPA. And what people were initially doing was everyone was anchored in their current day-to-day workflows. And they're like, oh, this is a part of my job I hate. I have to click this button 27 times. I have to copy and paste information from here. And so the initial adoption of RPA was really help me get rid of these super manual things that I'm having to do on a daily basis. Where it evolved, though, was workflows that were never possible before. And people couldn't even theorize that or wrap their head around that being able to, come to fruition with technology. And I'm finding it's really similar now with AI. People are so anchored in here is what I have to do today. Can you make this easier? Can you make this faster? Can you make this more efficient? As opposed to thinking through, what if I was removing all constraints? What could I do with this technology? What could this unlock that was never even feasible before? And that's where I really get excited when people are trying to think through that kind of stuff. One of the things that I know people are at least testing is one-to-one ABM at scale. And this is something where I think has always been a little bit of a panacea, but never was actually possible. I talked to dozens of companies who have done maybe one test before where they're like, yeah, we've done it for 2 accounts, but it was essentially just way too much work. And so now being able to take 300 accounts every single month and do full blown campaigns at scale, that's one thing that I'm kind of hearing. Full on role replacement, like you were saying. It's how can we take the process end to end, maybe on the BDR side, doing account research and identification, doing contact identification, creating all the sequences, creating all the logic behind that, doing it across multiple channels. That's, stuff that is now feasible. But again, it's kind of a leap.
Yeah. I think, there's certainly rewards to be gained here for those who kind of think this through and think this out, figure this out fast, right? Like the opportunities for disruption and competitive differentiation are tremendous. If you can jump on that and do that more quickly and more efficiently, for sure. And I think in a time, we're all living in a time where we're still struggling with budgets and the market adoption and people like having less budgets available. So I do think this could be a great way of like rethinking how you can be a stronger contributor in the organization and how you can make a bigger difference. So yeah, I agree with you. That's really interesting.
Where do you think, though, regardless of how good this technology gets, where do you think we always need humans?
Yeah, you talked about personalization. I think I'll give you a few examples. I think where there needs to be an element of empathy or an element of just the personal voice and context of that personal voice. So it might be specific negotiations, or it might be you have a customer issue that needs to be resolved. And I think it's hard to do that with AI. I think that just requires a little bit of a human touch and direct engagement that I think would be very difficult to accomplish without a human interaction. So like that empathy, where that's required, I think you're always going to need a human. I think still a lot of, I was reading the other day, I was kind of shocked. I was reading about this company in Asia that just hired a CEO who wasn't a person, who was AI, right? So like, I was like, how do you do that? When I was thinking about it, like, for me, the strategy still needs to be, I would still hope the strategy still needs to be defined somewhat by a human today. But just hearing that this company has actually hired AI to be their CEO, I don't even know how to wrap my head around that, what that would mean. Like, how do you make decisions? How do you determine org design and strategy? So I'm going to have to read up on that a little bit more. But I think that for me, like strategic elements, areas of empathy would be the areas where I would say it's still going to be hard to drive that.
That sounds crazy. I'm gonna have to look that up. I would love to. Yeah, man, that's like actually taking it really, really one step beyond.
Yeah,
one thing I am. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think they were interviewing a prominent CEO who had predicted that might happen in 30 years, but that was like a year ago, and here we are a year later, and like it's not 30 years. Like, and again, I don't know the company that's doing that, but like maybe it's a PR gig or some create attention. But wow, like even thinking that through was like mind blowing.
It feels a bit like a stunt, but we kind of touched on this before. So how I've kind of seen this right now, like boots on the ground, is we talked about this element of trust. And I feel like there's going to be 3 phases of adoption. The first phase is trust building. Right now, people are approaching AI with equal amounts of excitement and trepidation, and they don't trust it. And frankly, for good reason. It's kind of not ready yet to be fully trustworthy. And so I think the best tools out there will do a very good job of slowly building trust. I mean, we're even seeing, in our, with our company and our customers and prospects, they want to review everything that is an output of an AI tool. Right. And when you're talking about doing things at scale, that becomes pretty onerous for humans. But over time, if you do build trust, they shouldn't have to review everything. You might want to spot check a few things. Phase two to me is now we're providing the humans with proactive recommendations. So we're collecting data and insights. We're translating that into what you should do to hit your goals or to achieve your goals. And the humans can then take that and run with it. Phase three is where you actually start to replace a lot of this and put it on autopilot.
Right.
And I think, I don't know what that timeline looks like, but to me, it feels like we're still very much in phase one.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think you're spot on. I think there's just so many questions on it yet, and I do think that additional verification as a step, that's where most companies are. And I think to your point, like it's so new that there is this, on one hand, this desire to experiment and try new things out, but at the same time treating it with a little bit of skepticism and want to verify and validate it. And I think to your point, at some stage, I don't know, it's like when that shift happened from reading maps and going to the GPS system, at some stage we just didn't care anymore. Like I was talking to one of my colleagues, and he said it's kind of interesting. In many ways, there will be a time when we will completely unlearn skills that we have taken for granted, that just will change the way that our brains are wired. We'll just take things for granted that we today probably can't even imagine what that will look like. But it just changed. Even think about education, or think about, like, I have two kids, they're 21 and 18, and then thinking through like their college experience, and like even, you know, writing college essays and things like that. It's just like, how do you even put a lid on that, and what does that look like? It's just so different. And that's the generation that will enter the workforce in the next few years, and they're already experiencing this in college in a different environment. So they're seeing certain benefits, and then like, how do you apply that? And once you start working full time, like it's going to be a different world for sure.
The rate of technological change right now is just so crazy. I have a 2-year-old, and from the time she was about 4 months, she knew how to use a smartphone. Like, quite frankly, could swipe, could figure out the exact icon she wanted to click on and click on it. And, you know, I was thinking back when I learned to drive, we didn't even have smartphones. Your point of maps, like we printed out the map quest on paper and we're using that. And how quickly things change. And, you know, I can't even imagine what it's going to look like in 20 years. So it's an exciting time for sure.
Yeah, it is.
Well, we're pretty much at time. If anybody has one last question that they want to add to the chat, feel free. But I guess if there are any last thoughts or kind of areas you're most excited about, we love to hear those.
Yeah, no, I think it's been a great conversation. I think we've kind of hit on all the key points. I would say not just cautiously optimistic. I am optimistic. I think this provides opportunity just to rethink a lot of the things that we're doing. And like I said in the beginning, like marketing is being disrupted so much from where I started my career to where we are now. I just feel like the pace of innovation, to your point just before, it's just like the increments of change are just so much more rapid than they were even in the past. And so I think part of it is optimism. I think part of it is just like being open for change and like just like letting that in and being open for it rather than resisting it or rather than fighting it, because I think there's no point in completely blocking it out, because this will be transformative in our world. So I'm optimistic about the positives, cautiously that there are certainly some areas of abuse as well, but like I'm excited about where the journey's going.
As am I. It'll be a fun one to watch together. But thanks so much for your time today and all your great insights. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Elena. Really appreciate it. All right, have a good one.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining.